Okay, now we get into our gospel passage, which continues to come from Mark chapter 10, verses 46 through 52. It's actually the passage that comes literally right at the end of last week's gospel passage. And there's actually kind of a neat connection, I think, that I've always noticed about these two passages back to back. But anyway, let's read Mark 10, verses 46 through 52. As Jesus was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a sizable crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind man, the son of Timaeus, sat by the roadside begging. On hearing that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me." And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he kept calling out all the more, "Son of David, have pity on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take courage, get up, Jesus is calling you." He threw aside his cloak, sprang up, and came to Jesus. Jesus said to him in reply, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man replied to him, "Master, I want to see." Jesus told him, "Go your way, your faith has saved you." Immediately he received his sight and followed him on the way. Okay, so good. Let's back up a little bit. So if you remember our last session about the first reading, talking about the Assyrian exile, when people come in, they invade the northern part of this now broken kingdom, I guess. They invade the 10 northern tribes of Israel. They conquer them. They lead them off into exile, and not just into exile where they're like segregated but they kind of end up mingling with the rest of the people, so that it now becomes difficult to determine, well, who's an Israelite and who isn't an Israelite. And yet God makes this promise that he's going to bring them back. And there's going to be, what does he say, this immense throng that the people are going to return in, this immense throng. So, of course, we know that Jesus is the fulfillment of this. And what's happening? Well, he's with his disciples and a sizable crowd. And this is something you see throughout all the Gospels, is that Jesus doesn't always, but very frequently, he ends up having a very large crowd follow him. We might say an immense throng in a kind of way. Obviously, there's more to salvation than just what happens in the immediate time of Jesus's life on earth. But at the same time, there's this image of what the fulfillment is that he's come to bring. This immense throng, this sizable crowd. But anyway, then it says that Bartimaeus, this blind man, the son of Timaeus, sat by the roadside begging. So Bartimaeus, one scholar I was reading, he talks about this, that even the name Bartimaeus, it is symbolic or a sign, I guess, of the reality of the intermingling among the non-Jewish people. The non-Israelites. So the Israelites would have like Aramaic and Jewish terms that they use, and the word bar comes from that. So when it says his name was Bartimaeus, and then Mark goes on to tell us that Bartimaeus is the son of Timaeus. So that word bar is an Aramaic or Jewish term that means son. And the word Timaeus is a Greek name. So not a Jewish or Aramaic name, but it is a Greek name. So the fact that his name itself is a mingling of something that is Jewish and something that is Greek is a sign of the reality at play here, that the people have been, even now they're back in the promised land. Oh no, they're not. They're in Jericho, I guess, right? So I don't know exactly how it all plays out, but we know that. So this is actually kind of important, that the people on their way from the desert to the promised land, their first stop once they leave the desert is Jericho. Where they march around the city successively for 6 days, and on the seventh day they march around it for 7 times. I don't remember the number right now, but anyway, then they blow the trumpet and the walls come tumbling down. They have to defeat Jericho in order to get to the promised land. So that's actually really important, because the name of Jericho is meant to remind us. Now this actually happened, so it's not merely symbolic, but there is like this new exodus that Jesus is bringing about. Just like before, the people, they were exiled in Egypt, and then they were brought into the promised land. Now there's this new promise from the Lord through Jeremiah that people who are exiled are going to be brought back into a new promised land with this new covenant that later on in chapter 1 we hear about. Well, what is the new promised land of the new covenant? It is heaven. Where Jesus is the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So this is the reality, is that now that they're in Jericho and they go through Jericho to get to the new promised land, which is the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, where Jesus is. So anyway, that's just kind of a neat connection, I think. So Anyway, really cool. Okay, so Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, he sits by the roadside begging. So this is the reality of those times, is that when people had physical impediments, they ended up being cast out by society, or they ended up living on the peripheries. So people who were blind, for example, they didn't have the kind of assistance that we might be able to provide for blind people today. Now, it's still not perfect system, but like they didn't even necessarily have like glasses, in the same way that we have them. And so this guy Bartimaeus, like he's blind, and so he has to sit by the roadside begging. And how would he beg? Well, a lot of times these people would sit on the road, like in their lap would be, like a cloak or a blanket or something, so that if people wanted to give them alms, money, they could just throw it on their lap, and the blind person would know that it wasn't just limited, that the blanket or the cloak would collect that money, and that was like the source of like security for them, of knowing that the money's not going to slip away. Okay, so anyway, so Bartimaeus, this blind man, this man who has a mixed name between Jewish, Aramaic, and Greek terms, this man who is blind, who Jeremiah tells us that the blind and the lame are going to be brought back from the ends of the earth. Hearing about this sizable crowd, this immense throng that is following Jesus, he hears about all of this. And so he understands, like, oh, this is Jesus. And he must have heard about Jesus. He doesn't tell us this, but he must have heard about Jesus, because the moment he hears that it's Jesus of Nazareth, he begins to cry out saying, Jesus, son of David, have pity on me. Son of David. That's another really important thing, that among all of the prophecies of the Old Testament, there was the prophecy, or a prophecy, a promise, that the Messiah, the Savior, the Christ, was going to be a son of David. And so when this happens, he calls out and he uses the messianic title of Son of David, as though to show Jesus, like, I can't see you, but I understand who you are. And not just understand who you are in this natural sense, but I understand that you are someone who has been chosen by God himself. And so I'm calling out to you as the Son of David to be the one for me that God promises he's going to be. That God promises he's gonna bring the blind and the lame with him. And so here I am, a blind man, and I'm calling to you to be that for me, to bring me with you. I think that's just, it's such a cool thing. And yet what happens, many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. So the way you're probably going to hear this read is how I myself will read it, say, and many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. No, what is a rebuke? A rebuke is a sharp word. So in other words, they're like, dude, shut up. Like, you don't have a right to call out to this guy. You don't know who this is. You don't know who you are. You're just like scum beneath our feet. I don't know that they would have used exactly that language, but like a rebuke. They're like, stop talking right now. Stop yelling out to this guy right now. They would have gotten pretty intense with him. Like, don't you understand? Like, we're busy following the Messiah. Meanwhile, Bartimaeus is like, I do understand. That's why I'm calling out, because I am one that God has promised the Messiah would come and save. And so what? So he just keeps calling out. He keeps calling out all the more. That word calling out is kaleo, which is, we're going to hear this again in our next reading, but kaleo is actually the root word for ecclesia, ek kaleo, to be called out of. So Bartimaeus is calling Jesus. Ecclesia is the word for church. So Jesus is calling out to Jesus, all the more, Son of David, have pity on me. So then what? Jesus stops and he says, call him. Call him out of his station where he's at. So they called the blind man, saying to him, take courage, get up, Jesus. So notice like the quick shift of the crowd. Before they're like rebuking him and telling him to shut up. And now when Jesus initiates things, there's this change of, oh, he has called you out of that spot to be with him. So take courage, get up. Jesus is calling you. He's calling you to be a member of his church, to be a member of this community. So he threw aside his cloak, which again is so significant. He throws it, like his cloak, his security blanket, we could say, the thing that's collecting his livelihood. He throws that aside, like as though he understands and sees clearly, like, no, I'm physically blind, but spiritually I can see. And so he throws it aside. He's like, I just want to be with Jesus. So he springs up and he comes to Jesus. And you got to imagine, like, okay, he's this blind guy. So he's just like in like this spur of the moment, super energetic, like, okay, here I am. But, like, how am I going to get to you? So you have to imagine, like, the crowd before were trying to silence him and just like ignore him or cover up his voice. Now they're the ones who are guiding him to Jesus. That's just such a cool thing, So then what? So then he gets to Jesus and Jesus says, what do you want me to do for you? So this is the cool thing. Last week's gospel was James and John coming up to Jesus and saying, Lord, do whatever you want, or we want you to do for us. And Jesus asks the same question, what do you want me to do for you? He asks the same question to his disciples who have terrible intentions that he now asks to this blind man who has the best of intentions. Jesus, he says, what do you want me to do for you? Now, those who have terrible intentions, who have prideful or arrogant or whatever kind of intentions, they don't get the answer they're looking for. And now Bartimaeus is given the same question, and the true intentions or the true faith of his heart is revealed, where it says, he says, the blind man replied, Master, I want to see. I just want to see. I want to see. Jesus says, go your way. Your faith has saved you. He receives the answer because his request is just like, it's so simple, it's for his livelihood. I want to see. And Jesus says, your faith has saved you. It's just incredible. And what's also cool is I heard one scholar talking about this, that the Greek word, it's not the word for master, but the Greek word is rabboni, which means my rabbi or my teacher. So there's this like personal connection that Bartimaeus already has with Jesus, even though he's never seen him. That Jesus isn't just this like abstract or distant master that I got to obey, but it's no, like, you're my teacher. Remember, like our opening call, like talking about help us to love what you command, or make us love what you command. Like this reality of Jesus isn't just this slave driver that we got to do whatever he says or else, but it's like, no, he's our teacher who comes to teach us, and not just like our teacher, but he's my teacher. He's your individual teacher. And so we come to him, it's just like, Rabboni, my teacher. I want to see. Like this reality of a personal relationship that is necessary. Like, yes, it's true that we got to keep his commandments. It's yes that we're part of his community, his ecclesia, his community that he's called us out of the world. Yes, that's true, but we are also individual members of that community, individual members of his body. And so we're meant to have, yes, a communal relationship with him, as well as to have an individual personal relationship with him. And that's expressed so clearly. So anyway, so Jesus says, go your way. And then what does it say? Immediately he received his sight. So it's like for Mark, it's just like, oh yeah, of course, he receives his sight. But then what? And followed him on the way. He followed him. So Jesus says, you're healed. Go your way. Go whatever way you want to. And Bartimaeus freely chooses. He's like, I'm going to follow you on the way. Which is actually fascinating because if you peek in your Bibles into the next part here, chapter 11, next stop is Jerusalem, where Jesus is going to enter into Holy Week, and eventually he's going to enter into his passion. So Bartimaeus follows Jesus on Jesus' way, which leads to the cross. We don't know that Bartimaeus knew that was going to happen, but we did know that he knew that Jesus was the Messiah, is the Messiah. And so he says, wherever you go, that's where I want to be. Wherever you go, that's where I want to be, even if it's to Jerusalem, even if it's to the cross. I want to be there because my way, no, it's your way. It's your way, Jesus. You know, that's the beautiful thing of discipleship. Is the disciple is the person who has said, no, I tried going my own way and it didn't get me to heaven. It didn't get me to God. So now I want to follow you on the way. In fact, in the Acts of the Apostles, when Saul, so before Paul becomes Paul, he's Saul, and before he's a converted Saul, he's a Saul who is totally opposed to the church. And he gets permission to persecute those who are part of the way. That's the way is one of the terms that they use to refer to this community of people who believed in Jesus. So not only does he follow him on this specific way into Jerusalem, but he follows him on the way, which is to be a member of this community. Again, a member of the ekkaleo, the ecclesia, the church that is called out of the world, called out of their current station in life to follow Jesus as his disciples. Ooh, gosh, that's so cool. Okay, so we see the connections here between the first reading and the gospel of this promise that the Lord's going to gather his people. And we see just simply in the person of Bartimaeus that the Lord is gathering his people. We see that Bartimaeus, this blind man who hears about Jesus and understands that Jesus is the Messiah, the one who's to fulfill these promises. And it's just an image of what is to come, because we know that eventually the apostles are sent out first to Judah, first to the local area, to Jerusalem, but then to Samaria, then to the greater portions, and then to the ends of the earth. So there is this fulfillment that does take place on a larger scale in the person of Jesus as he sends out his body along the way. Super cool. Now again, we're gonna look more at the high priesthood. If you remember last week, we looked at Jesus as high priest in our second reading. We're gonna look more at that in our next session as we continue to look at Jesus. Like, who is he? He is this priest and this king who truly has the title of Son of David, which is monumental. Okay, God bless you. We'll see you then.